World government is the structure necessary for global justice.
I'm in a position to speak my mind, and by God, I'm going to do it. First, we Americans are going to have to yield up some of our sovereignty. That's going to be, to many, a bitter pill. Today, we must develop federal structures on a global level. To deal with world problems, we need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government. Most important, we should sign and ratify the Treaty for a Permanent International Criminal Court. Pat Robertson has written in a book a few years ago that we should have a world government, but only when the Messiah arrives. He wrote, and literally, any attempt to achieve world order before that time must be the work of the devil. Well, join me. I'm glad to sit here at the right hand of Satan.
Summary, actually you can get it in hardback, but it's in paperback as well, that was written in 1970, and also Gary Allen's None Dare Call It Conspiracy, which also summarizes Skousen's findings. And so let's look at some of the quotes from Skousen. He says himself, "I now am quite sure that tragedy and hope was suppressed, although I do not know why or by whom." See, he's not fully aware of just what the ultimate agenda is. He believed in what they were doing and hoped to bring it about. This is the new copy that you can now get at Amazon or wherever, republished in 2004, the original 1966 version. Also, if you're more of a video or audio type, John Taylor Gatto has an extensive 5-hour video series, and it's more of an audio, really. It's just him sitting there talking, being interviewed, so you can get as much out of it by just listening as you can watching. But it's kind of describes a lot of the data and details from Quigley's book. So here's some quotes from Tragedy and Hope. He says, "I know of the operations of this network because I've studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. It wishes to remain unknown, but I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." So that's basically why he wrote the book. He goes on, "Its aim is nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole." Sound familiar? It's basically another way of saying just what Klaus Schwab said in several of the quotes that I gave you yesterday in his new book. He goes on to describe the new world this way: "The individual's freedom and choice will be controlled within very limited, narrow alternatives by the fact that he will be numbered from birth and followed as a number through his educational training, his required military or other public service." Remember when Obama was first elected, he was talking about bringing back conscription. This is all part of their plan. His required military or other public service, his tax contributions, his health and medical requirements, and his final retirement and death benefits. Remember, this is in 1966. And here's the part where they planned the fake left-right paradigm. So this isn't just something that people made up to get you discouraged about the American political system. This is something that was in earnest planned by the elite. He says, quote, "The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can, quote, throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy." So in the book, I give you a lot more details from other sources that talk about this fake left-right paradigm. But again, it should be self-evident by now, right? I mean, why it's a one-way street, and it doesn't really matter who's in office. Nothing of any profound significance happens. Of course, at the philosophical level, every one of us as a Bible-believing Christian and a conservative ought to resonate with the stated platform of the Republicans rather than the Democrats. But that's just words on a paper, right? And I give this example in the book of when Reagan was elected in 1980. Remember Carter, right before he left office, instituted the Department of Education. So that's not that old of a federal agency. But it was a key part of their plan to control education, and here we are 40 years later, and we're dealing with CRT, woke, stuff, transgender stuff, right? It all was part of their plan. They're very patient in rolling out their plans. So Reagan campaigned against Carter during the campaign, and I've got the exact quote from the RNC platform. He campaigned, and it was part of the RNC platform, in the abolishment of the United States Department of Education. And all the Christians, yay, yay, rah, rah, Reagan, let's get him in there. And of course, he got in, and over the next 8 years, not only did he not abolish the Department of Ed, but it doubled in its revenue and its funding from the federal government. Nothing ever changes. One quote that I give in there, I forget who said it, but he said, the Republican growl is always worse than its bite. You know, so they'll say anything, but when given the opportunity, they don't do anything. Now, does that mean they're all explicitly and intentionally a part of some grand conspiracy? No, but it does mean they're controlled. Many of them are a part of it, but they're absolutely controlled. And I could tell you more stories about that just from people that experienced it firsthand. But a word that we have bandied around a lot is called the New World Order. From the earliest days of our country, Luciferians, Freemasons, and later the Illuminati have been seeking a new beachhead for this satanic agenda to take over the world. It's no accident that with the discovery of America, they saw an opportunity, and they called it the New World. They intended, not the Puritans, not the original Pilgrims, but the founding ones that came over, intended for this to be the beachhead of the New World Order. And, the word order in New World Order refers to control and power and authority. And so it's amazing how often this comes up in their own literature. And let me give you just a quick survey. Obviously, by now, people probably recognize the frequent references that H.W. Bush made to it, and this is from his State of the Union address in 1991. We will succeed in the Gulf, and when we do, the world community will have sent an enduring warning to any dictator or despot, present or future, who contemplates outlaw aggression. The world can therefore seize this opportunity to fulfill the long-held promises of a new world order. Richard Nixon, before him, when he met in China in 1972, February of 1972, said, each of us, speaking to the leader of China, has the hope to build a new world order. Gorbachev said in 1987, we are moving toward a new world order. In his mind, it was communism. Communism is definitely a formidable foe, as is Islam and some of these other movements, socialism, fascism, Nazism, all that, but it's all just part of the puzzle. It's not the puzzle. And sometimes people that understand that there is an evil force at work trying to bring in a one-world system kind of fixate on one or another of these components of it and don't recognize that that's just one piece of the puzzle. Kissinger said the New World Order cannot happen without U.S. participation, as we are the single most significant component. He told this on April 19, 1994 at the World Action Council. Yes, there will be a New World Order, and it will force the United States to change its perceptions. In the second second session today, we're going to talk more about Klaus Schwab and the transhumanist agenda and see some quotes that sound eerily similar to this idea of changing your perceptions. We actually looked at some of them yesterday, if you remember, how we've got to rethink what it means to be human and rethink what, the social constructs and things. Years later, Kissinger was still promoting the New World Order when he told a CNBC interviewer in 2008 that I think that referring to President Obama's, his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. Not to digress too much, but Obama was absolutely a 100% Manchurian. He was groomed from birth to do this. He kind of came out of nowhere. His past is very shady. You can't find a lot of his documentation. And all of a sudden he is placed in office, and they really thought that might be an opportunity to really come to fruition, this one world system plan. But again, it's not monolithic. It's not perfect or easily controlled. And he got in there, and he actually, once you become president, you have, even though you're controlled, and they all have been, you still have a certain amount of power, and your finger's still on the button, so to speak. And so he actually betrayed some of the old guard elite in favor of the nouveau riche, part of the global elite, and there were some internal struggling and battles, and so They had some cleanup to do, and eventually they certainly advanced a lot of their agenda, don't get me wrong, during those 8 years, some pretty evil things, but it didn't come about as optimistically from Kissinger's perspective as he thought. Strobe Talbott is the president of the Brookings Institution, another globalist think tank located on so-called Think Tank Row in Washington, D.C. And Talbott, who served as the Deputy Secretary of State under President Bill Clinton, told Time magazine in July of 1992, "In the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all." Richard N. Gardner, former Deputy Secretary of State for Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, said, quote, "In short, the House of World Order," by the way, this is in his book, his article that he wrote for the Council on Foreign Relations has a magazine called Foreign Affairs, some of you may be aware of it, that really promotes a lot of their globalist agenda. And he wrote an article in 1974, in the April edition, entitled "The Hard Road to World Order." And this is what he said: "In short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion." Let's see, what does God's Word say? Who's not the author of confusion? God. That means there's only one other option. Who is the author of confusion? Satan. But in the end, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than an old-fashioned frontal assault. See, they've got an agenda. H.G. Wells, in his book entitled The New World Order, ruled countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protesting it. World War II, again, Winston Churchill, "From the days of Spartacus, Weishaupt, Karl Marx, Trotsky, this world conspiracy has been steadily growing. This conspiracy has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century." He said, "The creation of an authoritative world order is the ultimate aim toward which we must strive." Charles de Gaulle, same era, "Nations must unite in a world government or perish." I think I mentioned this yesterday. James Paul Warburg said, "We shall have world government whether you like it or not, by conquest or by consent." Teddy Roosevelt said, "Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people." I talked about Manly Hall's reference to the invisible powers that pull the strings. You see that come up a lot, and you're going to see it in some of these quotes, this idea of an invisible government. Woodrow Wilson famously said, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately, and some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." FDR said, "The real truth of the matter is, and you and I both know it, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government of the U.S. since the days of Andrew Jackson. And in politics, nothing ever happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way." That's why I've said in one of the sessions, the final one today, I think, is entitled, "Nothing is as it seems." Right? FDR said, "Remember, you're just an extra in everybody else's play." Well, he was close. I think we're just an extra in the Luciferians' play. They think they've got control of everything. And again, we understand the biblical theology behind it. We understand that the mortal wound was delivered at Calvary. But as the illustration I use in the book is the illustration of say a missionary who's living out in the jungles, and he comes back to his hut after being out, and he sticks his head inside this tent, and he sees a huge python has made its way into his tent. So he pulls out his sidearm and shoots it right in the head, whereupon the python begins to writhe in pain, and he steps outside while he's waiting for this noise to go silent. And as he stepped outside the door of his tent, he hears this mortally wounded python just writhing around and knocking things off of tables and knocking his bed over and knocking pots and pans around. And eventually, after some time, all is quiet, and he goes in and drags off the dead python. Well, Satan received that mortal wound at Calvary, but he is writhing in pain, and he's going to take down as many people with him along the way. And someday, he's going to be cast into the everlasting lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet are. But right now, for reasons known only to God, he's been given a lot of sway. Edward Bernays is another person you should know about. He was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of public relations, often referred to as the father of public relations. He wrote the book Propaganda, and he died in 1995. He was 104 years old. But he's considered one of the 100 most influential Americans by Life magazine in the 20th century. His many books are things like Crystallizing Public Opinion in 1923, and I mentioned Propaganda in 1928. He had many campaigns that he was responsible for. His uncle, by the way, was Sigmund Freud, and Bernays describes the masses as an irrational group of people subject to herd instinct, and he talks about how you can use crowd psychology and psychoanalysis that he got from Freud, his uncle, and psychoanalysis to control people in very different ways. So listen to what he said. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society, and those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. There's that word again, invisible. Another quote, there are invisible rulers who control the destinies of millions. It is not generally realized to what extent the words and actions of our most influential public men are dictated by shrewd persons operating behind the scenes. Here's Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. And, if you try to buck the system, they'll just Arkanside you and claim you had a heart attack, and you're found dead in your bed with a pillow over your head at a private ranch, and the coroner calls it in from 50 miles away and said, yep, it was a heart attack, never even touched the body. So just ask Scalia. Zbigniew Brzezinski served as the counselor to LBJ, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, and he was a very heavy influence over decades in American policy. He died in 2017, but he said the regionalization is in keeping with the trilateral plan, which calls for a gradual convergence of East and West, ultimately leading toward the goal of one world government. National sovereignty is no longer a viable option. He said the technocratic era involves, by the way, this he wrote in 1970 in his famous book, Between Two Ages. The technocratic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values, and by that he means of liberty. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date, complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. Those files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news. So these are the kind of things these people are saying, and it's in plain sight. But when they're on the controlled media, as I showed you yesterday, none of them ever ask them about that. Hey, why didn't you talk about in your book from 1970 how people are just a bunch of useful idiots and useless breeders and easily manipulated? No one ever asks them that. Why? Because it's all part of the show. It's all part of being controlled, and the media is complicit. He said, persisting social crisis, the emergence of a charismatic personality, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be the stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into a highly controlled society. Now, not long before he died in 2017, he made this terrifying statement. The older these guys get, when they get more desperate, kind of like Klaus Schwab today, really, they can taste it. They think they're so close to this long-awaited, coveted one-world system where they're in charge, then the more careless they get with their words. But from a speech in London, he said, today it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Oh yeah, it's easy. We're going to talk about that in our final session. Just a couple more quotes, then we'll take a break. This is from Father Pedro a rupee. This is from a UPI story from December 27, 1965. This conspiracy makes use of every possible means at its disposal, be they scientific, technical, social, or economic. It follows a perfectly mapped out strategy. It holds almost complete sway in international organizations and financial circles in the field of mass communication, press, cinema, radio, and television. Even modern presidents have made passing references to it. Clinton said, "There's a government inside the government, and I don't control it." Of course, with Clinton, you never really knew if he meant what he said or not. Depends on the meaning of control, I guess. I don't know. But Benjamin Disraeli said, "The world is governed by very different personages to what is imagined by those who are not themselves behind the scenes. The governments of the present day have to deal not merely with other governments, but with emperors, kings, and ministers, but also with secret societies which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents and can at the last upset all the government plans." Rockefeller, in his memoirs, titled Memoirs, probably paid someone 6 figures to come up with that title. But anyway, he said, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. Well, if that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it." Kind of like Cronkite yesterday when we watched him receiving that World Government Award, and he said, "Come join me here at the right hand of Satan." Ha, ha, ha. Rockefeller said, "We're on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order," right? He said, "The world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. Listen to this. This ought to chill you to the bone. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. Look, we don't need this national sovereignty stuff. Just trust us. We know what we're doing." Henry Kissinger said, today America would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told, notice how he words this, they were told that there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, false flags, that threatened our very existence. It is then that the peoples of the world will plead to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by the world government. So let's stop there for now. I had hoped to get into some of the fake news and censorship, but we will do that after the break. So let's take a break and come back in about 5 or 10 minutes.